Thanks very much for joining us, Marcus. I haven't seen him for 25 years or something like that. He's in Australia, 5 a.m. Thank you very much for getting up quite so early to be with us for an hour. We want to look at the Julian Assange case, chiefly the implications of what it means for information and the media, journalism, free speech in particular, under late-stage capitalism, imperialism. Marcus is a journalist in Australia. He's a member of the Australian Labor Party, was a former Labor Party press secretary, and was a former president of the Journalists Union in Australia. So I'm sure you have lots of insights. Thanks for joining us. About 25 minutes, and then we can have questions and contributions from the floor, I'd say. Thank you.
Thank you, comrades. It's great to be joining you from chilly, rainy Sydney at 5 o'clock in the morning. Reminds me of London summers. I think it was interesting, a comrade there just said that they thought that the Labor Party in Britain was a unique development. Of course, the Australian Labor Party is also a very similar type of organisation built on the trade unions here. So I really want to present this short talk in two parts. First, I'll just look at the founding and politics of WikiLeaks and around Julian Assange, WikiLeaks' aims and some thoughts about the nature of information under capitalism. And then I'll take a bit of a broader look at who controls information, who owns it, and raise some questions about program privacy and social media. As president of MEAA, MEAA stands for the Media, Entertainment, Arts Alliance, which is a union that covers journalists, actors, crew, and musicians. There was a period of forced amalgamations of unions under a previous Labor government, and we were jokingly referred to as the Clowns and Jugglers Union when we were all forced together. But anyway, we look after the arts. I'm no longer president. I'm just a rank and file member there. So Julian Assange has been a member of my union since 2007, when really WikiLeaks kicked off. WikiLeaks as a project, though, was many years in gestation. Julian Assange registered the domain wikileaks.org in 1999, but it wasn't first really used until 2006. WikiLeaks was formally launched in 2007, the year he joined my union. The inspiration for WikiLeaks reportedly, and a lot of this is secondhand stuff. I don't know Julian Assange, but I do know some of the, I know the editor-in-chief, Kristen Truffson, and a few other people are involved. So the inspiration was reportedly the publication of the Pentagon Papers by Daniel Ellsberg in 1971, which of course revealed the secret history of US involvement in the Vietnam War from 45 to 68. Those papers revealed the US knew it could not win the Vietnam War. The US government had been systematically lying to the population. And in that, it was revealed that the actual war aim of the Vietnam War was to contain China, which sounds rather familiar at the moment, doesn't it? At the launch, WikiLeaks proclaimed, quote, "The method is transparency, the goal is justice." And Assange said it was important not to confuse the goal and the method. In my article in Weekly Worker recently, I said that WikiLeaks' general approach could be described as techno-anarchism. I think that's a pretty straightforward. What I meant by that is using technology, WikiLeaks aims to disrupt power structures of the establishment to give ordinary people access to the hidden information of the state. And this will spontaneously, I suppose, empower people to make radical change once the scales fall from their eyes. Or 2011, at a speech in London to a demonstration, Assange had said, "If wars can be started by lies, peace can be started by truth." I rewatched that speech last night, my time. It's quite interesting in the context of him being released. He said he did want to see radical change. He also said Thatcher was right. There is no longer any society. There's just a transnational security elite carving up the world using your tax money. And to change that, we must not just petition governments, we must take them over by forming our own networks of strength and mutual value. Sounds very anarchistic to me. And I don't mean that as an insult, of course, I just mean that as a political program. He said, quote, wars are a result of lies. The Vietnam War was a result of the Gulf of Tonkin incident, a lie. Iraq War, a result of lies. Wars in Somalia, results of lies. Interestingly, he said the Second World War and the German invasion of Poland as a result of carefully constructed lies. So, I mean, I'm sure that was hyperbole for the hyperbole for the speech, but it does sort of reveal a lack of understanding of historical and class forces that lead to such conflict. He seems to say that wars come as a result of lies peddled by the media, and that reality is constructed around by liars. But for him, this should make us optimistic, because he said if wars can be started by lies, peace can be started by truth. So that is our task, to reveal the truth. It's worth going back further to remember Assange came from the hacker community. I actually knew people who knew him when he was at university. He didn't finish university in Melbourne. As a teenager, he was a hacker using the handle Mendax. He broke into the Pentagon as a teenager, and possibly NASA, although that's never been proven or admitted. He was caught and charged and let off pretty lightly, given his age, and I don't think there was anything particularly mendacious, despite being Mendax. In the early 90s, he actually cooperated with police to assist their child exploitation unit to uncover serious sex crimes and child exploitation online in the 1990s. But of course, WikiLeaks, after it launched, is best known for its release on the 5th of April for collateral murder. This was followed in October that year of Cablegate, that showed the extensive war crimes by the US and its allies in Iraq, and later revealed crimes in Afghanistan as well. 14 years, I won't go into all the legal ups and downs of his case. That's well documented, although still a lot of lies and misinformation pushed like that around that. So Assange really is a modern day man in the iron mask, hidden by the regimes for 14 years as an example for us all not to overly embarrass the empire. But as a result of his extensive detailing of war crimes, of a secret state, you could almost say, at which the masses are well aware of, this is now common information. Has empire crumbled? No, it certainly hasn't. I would say power structures of imperialism have not shifted at all, really, because of these revelations by WikiLeaks. I think they have given us some campaigning. I think in Australia, and can't remember the election, there was briefly a WikiLeaks party that actually unsuccessfully stood in the Senate here. So I'd say that while those at the center of the WikiLeaks campaign are extremely intelligent, dynamic, interesting people, they were very dogged and courageous in the long-term campaign to have Julian released. I'd say there's sort of an outer layer of perma-campaigners for Julian Assange who were actually pretty nutty conspiracy theorists, a lot of them. I was regularly attacked as president of the union for not doing enough by a lot of these people. I got a lot of online harassment because of this. There was an overlap with anti-vaxxers. You see some of the far right in the US who actually think that Julian Assange was motivated to support Trump over Clinton. I don't think that's the case. I think, like any journalist endeavor, they released information that they had, which may or may not have come from Russian intelligence sources, but they released information they had to get maximum coverage, and that was around Clinton and her emails. But I don't think there was an active support for Trump in that. But I think within those layers, if not in the center of the Assange crew itself, uh, their opposition to US power and their identification of US power as the major force for evil, I suppose, the major force for no goodniks, lands for many of them, though not all of them, it lands them in the camp of the idea that any of the US strategic enemies are our friends. So some of them are implicit, some of them explicit supporters of regimes in Damascus, in Moscow, in Tehran, in Beijing. But for most of them, it's more of a pursuit of what they call a multipolar world. This means they support the BRICS, they support the shift away from the US dollar as the major currency in the world, and they seem to think that having the major problem is that we have a unipolar world around US imperialism, and their political program is to push for a multipolar world that counters US imperialism. So their allies are not to be found in the world's working classes, but to be found in klepto and murderous regimes around the world, from Beijing to Tehran and Moscow. And I think this is obviously a false and dead end program, but it is one that bubbles through a lot of these campaigns. We see that in some, I think the audience here today knows that that is just a dead end campaign and program. I mean, this week we've had the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting in Kazakhstan, with Putin was there, Xi Jinping was there. Interestingly, Modi did not attend but sent a senior spokesperson. I think that shows Modi is trying to keep a foot in both camps, through his involvement in what's called the Quad with the US, Australia, and Japan against China, but he's also got a foot in that camp. But one of the main themes of that meeting that's just finalised yesterday was for a multipolar world, which is exactly what these, I call it the anti-imperialism of fools. They believe that they're campaigning against US imperialism, but they're just creating a world that is drifting towards war. So, of course, for Marxists and consistent Democrats, Beijing, Tehran, Moscow, and Damascus offer no path for peace, for justice, for a world without war. We need to favour our own camp. The world's working classes are the only agent globally that can lead us to beyond a world driven by corruption and war. So the campaign to free Julian has been long and slow. From tiny numbers of isolated activists, I think there was a very successful smear campaign about a decade ago against Assange. I think as a personality, he's obviously a complicated person just from looking from the outside. Accused of having a messiah complex. I don't know enough about the guy. I've never met the guy to be able to pass judgment on that. But obviously very driven and one-eyed in terms of his project to reveal information about, and probably didn't build a lot of friendships along the way to do that. But the campaign to smear him, and I think there's still a lot of conspiracy theories around that. The fact that the US, when Pompeo was head of the CIA and then latest Secretary of State, literally did hatch a conspiracy to either abduct or murder him, sort of does show that being a conspiracist in this area is not completely crazy. But I think there have been a lot of conspiracy theories around this, which makes it a mucky area to pass analysis. But for example, when I became president of the union, or even before that, it was to raise the issue of solidarity with Julian Assange. Most journalists and the union I'm in represents most mainstream journalists in Australia, similar to the NUJ in Britain. There was a lot of people who were saying, well, is he really a journalist? Should we really be bothering with him? And it was a particular part of my presidency to make sure that the union was full square behind the campaign to release Assange, warts and all, because it wasn't really about him. It was about the prosecution of journalism and a free press, and that's what it represented. Who controls information? Do the Whitehall, the Pentagon, the White House have a monopoly on who controls information? And I suppose that aspect of the program of WikiLeaks is one that we can share, that we are for transparency. We are for tearing up the secret pacts of the bourgeois states. So I think we do overlap in terms of the program, but we're under no illusions that merely the expression and release of that information will lead to a spontaneous uprising against imperialism. But from those very small numbers, we did manage to transform this into the beginnings of a mass movement in Australia in particular. We had ended up with a cross-party parliamentary group, include Conservatives, Greens, Labor Party members calling for his release. The Conservatives involved basically it was driven by nationalism, which you would expect. You know, Assange may be a rat bag, but he's our rat bag, and he shouldn't be in a US jail. He should be in an Australian jail. Was almost some of the Conservative rhetoric. So this multi-pronged approach for release was both bottom up. It was about building mass movement, the demonstrations outside courts in London, the protests in the United States, people in the sun and the rain, you know, on the street campaigning. It never hit mass demonstration, but also there were it did start to become a mass sentiment in Australia in particular that he should no longer be in jail. And he was a symbol of journalism in jail for many. There was a similar parallel to, there was an Australian called David Hicks who trained with the Taliban just before 9/11 and ended up in Guantanamo Bay. He'd never fired a shot. He was, you know, he became radicalized, went to Afghanistan to train with the Taliban, got caught up in the post 9/11 US police actions against anybody involved, and was in Guantanamo, and he had to plead guilty to a minor terrorism charge and then was released. I'm not saying at all that Assange is a terrorist, but if you listen to some of the rhetoric of the US, including people like Clinton, including people like Biden, they did call him a terrorist, and that was the attitude of the US intelligence community to him. So getting him out was no mean feat. And look, the interesting thing I want to say finally about the Assange case is, now that he's out, many of the Assangistas are sour at the credit being given to the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. Now, Anthony Albanese is getting a lot of credit for his release. Of course, he was dragged semi-unwillingly to the Assange case, although he was one of the few people in the Labor Party leadership who has been consistent for the last few years to have him freed. Many were very hostile. I know you have this culture in the Labor Party in Britain, but anyone to the left of you is just dismissed as a trot, and he's just seen as a trot, and that's just a catch-all for anyone, and therefore I don't have to engage with you. I just condemn you. That's like a curse word here as it is in Britain. But I would say that Assange would not have been freed in this way at this time if the ALP hadn't been in government. This isn't to say that the ALP has been squeaky clean on this, quite the contrary, but it shows an inadequacy in a lot of the anarchists and their understanding of power. They see all power as coming from the base up, which of course is hugely important as advocates of working class power. But also you need the salient of top-down power to get results. And I think in a quite a tortured way, the fact that it required the ALP in government, it probably required Biden in government as well. I don't know what Trump's attitude would have been. But anyway, I just wanted to make that final point on that. that you need a strategy that involves bottom up and top down in these power struggles. So second part, I'll be brief, Tina. Who owns information? I'm not sure the answer to this. So I'll throw this. It'd be interesting to hear what comrades think. Obviously, you want to. You can talk about knowledge capital, privacy, AI, and social media. We hear a lot about knowledge capital, but is that actually a form of capital in a Marxist sense? I'd like to know what you all think. Information and knowledge, of course, under capitalism are produced by capitalist firms as commodities. Petty producers, artists, musicians, freelance workers produce and sell information and knowledge. If you look at the media, which is where I've worked for 25 years, previous model was that capital owned a chokehold on the production of knowledge in the form of news media and used that as production leverage to create an audience for advertisers. And that's how they made millions and millions of dollars. That all got smashed by the internet. And now social media, primarily Google and Facebook, have hoovered those dollars up now, and you see mass sackings of journalists in the capitalist world as all that advertising money has shifted to the social media giants. I'll aim to finish at 5:30 or 5:30 in the morning here, whatever, 8:30 there, Tina. At the Sydney Morning Herald, where I used to work for a long time, we used to have a 5-story building that occupied legacy media, mainstream media occupied all 5 floors. Google moved into the ground floor, then the first floor, and literally ate the building up from below. The Sydney Morning Herald was bought by another media organisation, and Google took over the whole building. So the CPGB draft program, I had a look at it on this question, calls for the socialisation of internet service providers, public cloud infrastructure and other natural monopolies in communications, and an end to the corruption and advertising funded media. I mean, I think this is a good start, but I think given the international character of Google and Facebook, I think we need to have a broader and deeper program on this. The capitalist state has had no real way to respond. There's a bit of a crisis in information and media. Facebook and Google are now mass monopolies. I wrote an article a few years ago on this when Facebook banned news media in Australia, and they've done similar things in Canada. When the governments have tried to force these Facebook and Google to pay some money back to legacy media companies for the stories that they carry to get their own audience. And I thought of an analogy. In December 1883, a man called Gardner Green Hubbard was a businessman, lawyer, and founder of the journal Science and the National Geographic Society. He railed against a privately owned technology company upon which the great bulk of American business and political communication relied. Telegraph company Western Union had created the infrastructure and electrical public square of the Gilded Age of US capitalism, and with that came inordinate power. He wrote at the time, the importance of this business transcends its magnitude, for every political, general or local item of interest is sent by telegraph, and upon this news every daily paper depends for existence. Every important business transaction between parties at a distance and the most important and vital social communications are carried on by telegraph. He was deeply concerned that with this power, Western Union was a threat to American democracy given its control over the flow of information. This sounds pretty familiar. Today, Facebook and Google exercise similar monopolistic control over the huge volumes of electronic communication, information, and related advertising that are the lifeblood of the modern age. And as with the case of Western Union, their power is largely unregulated. In the US between 1866 and 1900, every elected Congress, save for one, considered legislation to tame Western Union's power. There were no less than 96 bills and resolutions brought before Congress that addressed the problem of Western Union. And during this period, Congress published 48 reports into the monopoly power of the telegraph company. That's more than one report a year, rivaling even the number of reports the Australian Parliament has put out into publishing diversity, digital platform and media ownership. So they called for Hubbard called for Western Union's business to be handed over to the post office, to be nationalised effectively. All attempts to regulate the company failed. It wasn't until Hubbard's own company, Bell Telephone, eventually swept aside Western Union's dominance of communication. The last Western Union telegram was sent on the 27th of January, 2006. So I use that as an analogy because capitalism has no way to regulate Facebook and Google, and we can't nationalize them. I mean, I've heard Galloway and I've heard other sort of nationalist left politicians call for the nationalization. Some have advocated for I think a British search engine or an Australian search. I mean, it's just crazy autarkic nonsense. So the only path forward we have is internationalizing these controllers, not nationalizing them. And the only analogy that exists, I think, in the modern world is the way the internet has emerged. And if you look at the World Wide Web, and so the back end of the web, the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, is run by Tim Berners-Lee. It's a global not-for-profit body that manages the structure and language of the web. So it ensures that a computer in Sao Paulo is able to communicate smoothly with a mobile device in Cairo. I think a similar model could work to manage global search functions, maps, information libraries, and other search engines. Wikipedia is also a successful non-commercial model. Such consortia could act as a model for a network of social platforms that democratically engage communities rather than treat them as a host from which to extract data to commercialize. And this also raises the question of privacy, which isn't in the CPGB program. Obviously, these massive institutions have access to a lot of our information. Facebook and Google can predict what we want for our birthday better than our partners probably can. And a lot of them will know our private peccadillos from our search engine history more than anybody else. This is massively, there's a lot of concern about privacy. This will exist also, I'd say, under socialism. In the EU, you've got the right to be forgotten law. And I think that's something worth examining and extending in some way, because under socialist society, we'll still want privacy. My final point is on, and I'm trying to pack in a lot here, artificial intelligence, which is also a dominant force now in these online search engines and online communities. We hear a lot of doom and gloom about human versus machine, that under AI, the humans, we get Arnold Schwarzenegger and Terminator and Skynet and all those memes. Of course, AI is just another form of capital. Like previous capitals designed to suck labour power from workers for private interests. This has taken a new technological form, but the fear that AI, the machines will control humanity is just part of the ongoing horror story of capitalism. Marx said, capital is dead labour, that vampire-like only lives by sucking living labour and lives the more labour it sucks. So AI at the moment is sucking the intellectual property of authors, artists, musicians, and presenting it back to us as the original work of the machine. I know my union and the International Federation of Journalists and a lot of actors unions, there was the big actors strike recently around this issue. Under capitalism, AI will continue to rob us of our information and our creativity. And I would say it's only in a socialist and, Steve Freeman, yes, this is propaganda for communism. Only in a communist society under a global commune that machines can be used as tools to liberate us from drudgery. At the moment, lots of memes around saying, I want AI to do my dishes and laundry so I can focus on art, writing, and music, rather than AI producing all the art, writing, and music. While on some levels that's inane, there is a profound truth here about information, capital, labour, and freedom. And I will leave it there.
Thank you, Comrade. We're actually going to have a session on AI in September where we look into some of those issues in a bit more detail. That was a really fascinating look at some of the aspects that we don't usually talk about when we talk about Julian Assange. Comrades, if you have any questions or contributions, short ones, because Marcus actually has to go to work now soon. We're gonna try to bring them in. I've got a couple of questions to get the ball rolling. You did touch on that, of course. Why is it being released now? And there was some chatter a few weeks leading up to it. You seem to locate it mainly in pressure from the campaign from the Australian government, rather than when you're looking at the reports here. It tends to be the thought was that the US elections are playing quite a big role, that Biden tried to take that bit off his plate and perhaps get the youth vote on board. How do you think in a priority of force?
Yeah, I think they definitely had. I think the Biden camp, because I'm not sure how much Biden is aware of these things, but anyway, I'm sure the Biden camp did not want to have a court case of a freedom warrior during an election that Trump could then use against Biden. I think that definitely played a part. The other aspect of the timing, of course, was that there was a really interesting article in the Washington Post soon after his release that legal advice to the US government was that they would lose in the British courts eventually. Now, this was also the thought of the Assange camp, that eventually they could win legally, but that might be in 2 years or 3 years, and they didn't want Julian was very unwell in jail, and they were worried about his health and his life. I mean, that he was in court reports reported as suicidal at times, which is not surprising given the amount of time he'd been in jail and the deprivation he'd faced. So I think those played into the timing as well.
Thank you. Another interesting issue was at the beginning, this question about truth and peace and war and lies, etc. I mean, you did touch on, that's a very simplistic way to look at wars, what wars are being fought over and how they're being fought over. And also, I mean, how many people will have actually read the WikiLeaks? I think this is not something that millions of people will read. How do you see the role of, say, communists like us interpreting the truth? How important is it not just to have it out there, but actually make sense of it? And that relates to the issue about media, whereas it's really important that we fight for the democratization, of course, of existing companies like Google and Facebook, etc. Clearly, we also have to build our own media and our own servers and our own channels, etc. How do you see that role of the mediation between truth and masses of people?
Yeah. So yes, most people have not looked at. I'd say most people, even in this discussion, haven't trawled through WikiLeaks information, but most people have seen the collateral damage. Not most. A huge chunk of the human population would have seen the collateral murder video of the Apache helicopter shooting up Iraqi civilians and journalists. That will be why that is an image that's as seared on human consciousness, really, as the napalm children from the Vietnam War. I would say it's a very striking. So yes, but the role of Marxists is to take information, interpret it, and take it through media and organization. Ultimately, organization is what counts, and unity around a democratic program for social change. And information can feed into that, but it's about having a democratic program for social change that is essential. That change will not come spontaneously. And I think that is the big difference between the program of enlightened anarchism. I'm quite sympathetic to anarchists. It's not meant pejoratively, but I think that's the difference between Marxists understanding history as social forces, and the need for unity of the working class to achieve lasting democratic and radical change.
It's also interesting the question of conspiracy theories, etc. And it is a tricky one. Here in the Labour Party, for example, there was a conspiracy against Corbyn. Clearly, there were people working together to get rid of him and to do the left in, etc. But of course, that's sort of without the organized left taking a lead on these issues and explaining it properly and fighting a proper fight. It's now common knowledge that, you know, Israel is pulling the strings of the Labour Party, etc. Rubbish conspiracy theories trying to explain a complex, you know, situation. Again, how do you see in terms of the role of Marxist communists to tackle easy answers to why is the US supporting Israel, for example?
So I think that the fact that a lot of this information, such as US war crimes, British war crimes, everyone knows Blair lied, 45 minutes, everyone knows Blair lied. It produces a deep cynicism in people, I think, that so for people who aren't particularly engaged in politics, they just say, oh, well, Blair lies. They all lie. Corbyn lies. They all must lie. Trump lies. Biden lies. You all lies. I'm just going to go to Tesco. You know, people just disengage, and it produces a deep cynicism in the working class. And I think that's, I mean, without being a conspiracist myself, I think that is part of the aim, is to create deep cynicism, so to stop effective social change. And I think this does take root in people who want social change, that they see everything as a conspiracy, that COVID was a conspiracy, that China must have released a virus, etc. Everything becomes a conspiracy. It's like the flip side of apolitical cynicism is this deeply paranoid conspiracy theory where, and some of it does veer into anti-Semitism on the left and the right, in terms of some of these conspiracies, but not exclusively. I mean, and I think Trump cynically uses this cynicism, and demagogues on the right cynically use that cynicism for their own purposes, like Farage, Brexit, and so on. I think you see that widespread.
Absolutely. Mark, please.
Yeah. Firstly, it's absolutely great that he got out. Delighted myself and lots of friends of mine who are not massively political, to be fair, but lots of people felt it was an injustice what happened to him. A few things. I've been writing obviously for about 20 odd years and getting paid for it. Sometimes well, mostly fairly poorly, to be fair. But even from the beginning, it was very, very difficult to get anything about the excesses of the military into the media. In 2002, 2003, I wrote an article for the Journal newspaper, which was about the heroism of British soldiers going back to secure the bodies of their dead comrades in the crater in Aden. And that got printed on the basis that the Journal would then follow it up with 3 further articles about the excesses which they then engaged in is retribution for their comrades having been killed. And all of those articles were pulled. The deputy in charge of the Journal newspaper quit on the spot, and the story has never, ever resurfaced in the last 21 years. It's slightly ironic. That's just as an aside. There's plenty of other stories I could go on and talk about in terms of the military, particularly some of the things that, of course, are then done to them. Gulf War syndrome, of course, was when people were actually poisoned as a result of organophosphates. It had nothing to do with military conflict. And most of the lads who had Gulf War syndrome that I worked with on that issue back in the early part of this century, they're long since gone. They're dead, even in their 40s and 50s. Fairly fit blokes, to be fair. The irony about Wikipedia is itself, its own restrictions on putting information was pretty prevalent. The reasons why I particularly faced this is that many of the stories which I tried to put on Wikipedia were stories that had actually broken. Some of them were political stories and some of them were football stories, but they have to be run through somebody who vets those stories. And if they didn't think it went with the norm that was on there, they basically just said, well, you're promoting your own work. And obviously my response to that was, well, it was my work that's proved these stories to be accurate and true, but nevertheless, they were just simply knocked back. Yeah, there's plenty of other stuff which I'd done in the big issue in the North magazine, which I tried to get onto Wikipedia, stuff which had even been as, you couldn't call it a bourgeois newspaper, but a newspaper of sorts, but sometimes you just couldn't get past the censors. But that aside, you know, I'm full of praise for Wikipedia, and when the opportunity came up to put bits of money into it, I certainly did do so. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Quickly, Steve Freeman, and then we're going to go back to Marcus, who has to go to work now. Steve.
Hi, Marcus. Yeah, very good, interesting talk, and giving us an Australian side to it, which is a missing thing for us over here. There's also a kind of British side to it as well, in terms of campaigning that went on here and what we can learn about the way in which politics works in this country, which is really important. And we did election leaflet. I'm proud to say that it concentrated on Palestine and democracy, but we included free Julian Assange. We had no idea at that point. In fact, during the course of the election campaign, because of our intervention, obviously, he was let out. So I don't think you've counted that in your analysis, Marcus. But our election leaflet, I think, possibly was a tipping point, you know. But anyway, a couple of other points really. There was a big argument here, and you covered that as well, because Julian Assange lost a lot of support because some people looked at it about to be dealing with him as a person. Did this man do these things in Sweden or not? Was it a smear? Everybody went down that plug hole. It's not about a person. It's about the issues. That's the really important thing. And you could say, well, whether Julian Assange did or didn't do these things, it doesn't matter. He's being hammered because he is a journalist and he is exposing truth to us. And I think that's the important thing. And don't knock, and I don't think he did do that, but in a way, truth is revolutionary. So I think anything that exposes the truth raises consciousness, you know, as in Pravda, truth and justice, of course, a famous name for baby. But as you say quite rightly, just because you're exposing truth, you can combine that with anarchist politics. You can combine that with Stalinist politics. It doesn't necessarily have a progressive thing, just merely in and of itself, truth and justice. But I think exposing the truth does raise people's consciousness about what the true state of thing is. Science, really, isn't it? You know, it's a scientific approach to the world. And now my last point will just be this, Marcus. You're absolutely right. Certain problems, certain issues cannot be solved on a national basis. Capitalism is a global system, and many problems are part of a global system of power and can't be solved in any one country. I think that's it. And when you're talking about AI and things like this, then we're getting into that whole area that only global solutions can deal with those and national ones can't. But the but is, that doesn't mean, therefore, that all we can do is sit in one country making propaganda for a world solution. Well, you can do that, but you have to have a strategy for how to deal with the question of democracy in whatever country you happen to be in, whether that's Australia or whether it's here in the UK. And I think that most of the left don't do that, either pose the global thing or indeed pose the importance of democracy has got to be fundamental. And you said that, Marcus, it's not a disagreement with you at all. All right, thank you. And nice to see you again, by the way. Looking well, talking sense. Looking well and talking sense, great.
Doesn't get much better than that. Okay, we're going to have to, can't bring any more contributions in now. So Marcus, would you like to reply to a few comments there?
Yeah, well, thank you. And if you're at Communist University this year, you'll get to see a bit more of me in person. I'll be coming. I think I'm not listed as a speaker yet, but I think I am giving a talk on philosophy and physics. And does matter exist? So You can have a think about that.
Of course it does.
Yeah, well, some quantum physicists don't think it does. But anyway, my day job is working with a lot of quantum physicists, and they've got some very interesting ideas, some of them. So yeah, I think I'll just pick up from Steve on consciousness raising. I mean, consciousness raising is an organizing tool as well. I mean, if you look back at the civil rights movement in the US, the anti-racist movement, overcoming internalized racism, comrades in the Black liberation movement, it was all about consciousness raising. What is the source of our poverty? What is the source of our lack of power, of our home, our shit homes, our bad jobs? I mean, so consciousness raising is hugely important, but it needs to be an organizing tool. You need to combine. If you don't combine information and consciousness raising with organization, I think you breed cynicism, and you breed hopelessness and individualism and isolationism. If all you know is that the world is shit, why bother doing anything? If there's no hope, if there's no collective organization, if there's no like-minded people to feel the glimmers of freedom with, I mean, that is what we also do as Marxists. We're not just doomsayers at all. I mean, we're the ultimate in hope givers, aren't we? We're saying that only our program is the one that can lead us out of this shit. And I think that that is an important. It's very difficult to remain positive, but I think a democratic program for radical social change at the national level and international are hugely important. On this question of national versus international, I think any successful radical national movement where people with politics like ours came to power at the national level, you can imagine the opprobrium from the world's bourgeoisie. They would cut you off the internet if they could. There would be massive retaliation at an international level. So if you're democratic, I think that's even more the case now than in 1917 and the failed Russian Revolution. That if your program is not immediately international in some form, you will get crushed. And I think we have to be very cognizant of that, and we have to organize internationally because the speed of information is much greater. If a lie is halfway around the world before truth gets its boots on, as they say, that process is massively accelerated in today's information age, and we see that, and it's cynically used. And I think one of the positive things about WikiLeaks and why I think Julian Assange is a hero, despite, I mean, I don't know what his politics are like now after 14 years in jail. I think the guy just needs some time in the Australian bush looking at the horizon. I heard that when he was flying, he hadn't seen a horizon for 12 years. And his lawyer, Jennifer Robinson, who I know, said that he spent the whole time looking at the plane at the horizon because he hadn't seen one. I mean, and that level of personal deprivation is inconceivable. And that's why I called him a man in the iron mask. But so I don't know where his personal politics are now. But one of the I think the positive things of WikiLeaks is that it's a challenge to us Luddites in the Marxist movement. I mean, do you know of any Marxist organizations with a really professional online presence, with a really, really good understanding of online security, of being able to project well using modern information technology? I don't. We're really, really bad at it. And I think unless we get good at it, we're going to be stuck in online chat rooms of 42 people for a long time. And I think we need to be much more ambitious. And I think WikiLeaks challenges us to be ambitious. I mean, WikiLeaks hit billions of people. Billions of people began to have some consciousness raising because of the work of WikiLeaks. And it's that kind of elan and audacity of WikiLeaks that I think we should be inspired by and challenge ourselves to raise ourselves to that level of social engagement. I'll leave it there.
Very good last words, absolutely. And even just on the level of you know, the internet and revolution, we've seen that they don't just switch off, the ruling class can switch off not just websites, it can switch off the whole bloody internet if there's a revolution happening. So unless we actually get our act together and form our own technical solutions as well as political solutions and professionalize our output, etc. I mean, this is really good, but you know, it could be better, just a touch. So, but you know, we have to take that seriously. Thank you very much, Mark. It's a really interesting view at some aspects of the Assange case that most people hadn't looked at, and from your perspective. So that was great. Please, comrades, join us next week. We're going to be joined by John Dunn from the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign to review the film Strike, an Uncivil War. If you get a chance to watch it somewhere, please do. It is brilliant. It is really, really good. It's an excellent look at particularly the Orgreave picket that was crushed by the police, but puts it in a really important political context. We're also going to be looking at the book Citizen Marx by the author Bruno Leibold, who'll be joining us to discuss this in a bit more detail. So lots to look forward to. And you know, if you're staying up tonight, enjoy, or not, as it may go. The Not the Andromar show is on from, I think, 9:45 to have a live discussion on all the various issues. So thanks very much, Marcus. Have a good day, and the others have a good evening. Bye-bye, comrades.